Out their daily specials on Facebook or visit Piccalilli.com.
The Piccalilli. Get in the zone, AutoZone.
Welcome to AutoZone. What are you working on today? So you've got an oil change coming up? We're here to help you get it done. Right now, you can get 5 quarts of Castrol GTX conventional motor oil and an STP oil filter for just $27.99. And with our next-day delivery and free same-day store pickup, you can get it fast, your way. Getting the job done just got easier. Restrictions and details at AutoZone.com.
Get in the zone, AutoZone.
The radio home of the Philadelphia Eagles.
He's hit. Eagles have a flag.
WENJ HD Millville, Atlantic City, 97.3 ESPN. This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
Oh, what a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
Game night, Josh Hennig leading you up to Yankees, Indians, game number 1. Shane Bieber versus Garrett Cole. How wild is that going to be? By the way, the Astros came back to beat the Twins. White Sox currently beating the A's to my personal chagrin, 4-1. Game night here on 97.3 ESPN. We got Eagles and NFL to talk about. What a game last night. We got to touch on that as well. Plus, the NBA Finals start tomorrow night. Hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Lakers versus Heat. And speaking of those Lakers, a brand new book has come out. I'm 5 chapters in, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Jeff Pearlman, the author of great books such as Football for a Buck, Showtime, as well as others like Gunslinger. He's going to join me coming up at 6:20 talk about his new book, Ring Circus. Let me tell you, this book has got some treats in it. There's things you're going to learn about Kobe Bryant. You're going to learn about Shaquille O'Neal, learn about Phil Jackson that you just never knew before. And the way Jeff finds and gets his information is absolutely incredible. So Jeff will be coming up at 6:20 tonight to talk more about the book Ring Circus here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. The PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0973. Before we get to the Eagles, I can't overlook the game last night because I know it's not a popular aspect of the game to talk about, but if you're being honest, if you are being objective, if you are being completely unbiased and just totally stripping away everything, you want to know the reason why the Chiefs had a big win last night. You want to know the reason why the Kansas City Chiefs went out there and had a big game and got that done. Because the whole time, the whole build to the game was Mahomes versus Lamar, but that was not the matchup that we saw go down last night. Last night, it was Steve Spagnuolo and Tyrann Mathieu versus Greg Roman and Lamar Jackson, and Spags got the best of Roman, and that Chiefs defense totally just disrupted the entire flow of the Ravens offense. And that's what's incredible. When you watch football games and you see games like last night where a team is supposed to be great, and now the Baltimore Ravens, who are 21-1 against the rest of the NFL, not named the Kansas City Chiefs. Lamar Jackson said that there are kryptonite. And I think Lamar is, honestly, for as great as he is and as incredible as he is, he's being a little bit ridiculous because there is something that is specifically behind why they are beating them. It's not like the Ravens never stopped the Chiefs. It's like the Chiefs scored on every single play, every single time on the field. No, they didn't. There were a couple times they did not score. But the Ravens offense couldn't get the job done. And it was because the way the Chiefs disrupted the Ravens offense. And it was in some ways a bit of a bend, don't break. Spagnuolo's done an incredible job since taking over as DC down there in Kansas City. And when you think about what Andy Reid has done in Kansas City, his greatest win, his greatest success has been the fact that, number one, he went out and found a quarterback who is better than Alex Smith, and he's better than Donovan McNabb, and he's better than everybody else that Andy Reid has ever coached. And he did it by trading up in the NFL draft for a guy that a lot of people had questions about coming out of the draft. All questions answered. What Andy Reid did was he hired a coach in Steve Spagnuolo who is great at handling the situation in front of him, and that Andy Reid has a good relationship with. And Spagnuolo, the reason why he had struggled to be successful in other places is because he didn't have the players to run the kind of defense he wants. Tyrann Mathieu and Chris Jones are two of the best at what they do in the NFL. And when you have two of the best at what you do in the NFL and you give them a coach who is willing to be aggressive and is willing to take it to the other team the way Spags did last night, that's the results you see. And I'm not going to sit here and say Kansas City goes undefeated. Everybody has a bad day or two on the football field. But let me tell you something. If Kansas City wins on a Super Bowl this year, I certainly won't be surprised. By the way, for those who are wondering, the average for last night's Monday Night Football game was about 14 million. It averaged 14 million people last night. That was the average. That was not the peak. So 50% of Kansas City was watching the game last night, for those who might be wondering. But, hey, nobody's watching football, right? 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation, the playsugarhouse.com text board. I did want to get to the Eagles because, one of the things that was brought up when the defense coordinator, Jim Schwartz, spoke to the media today, he was asked about the team in front of them. And that's the 49ers, a team that, similar to the Eagles, dealing with a lot of injuries, that is dealing with a lot of issues. No Nick Bosa. Raheem Mostert is currently listed as doubtful to play. You're talking about a team that could be without Solomon Thomas as well, so you're missing two of your top defensive linemen. You're talking about a team that could be missing its number one running back. The guy who filled in for him last week got injured as well, Jerick McKinnon. You're talking about a team who is without some of their top receivers, and their number one, quote-unquote, wide receiver is the rookie Brandon Ayuk, who I would have loved personally to see in the Eagles draft. That's neither here nor there. And they signed Mohamed Sanu up the street because the Patriots didn't want him, which is always a little bit questionable for anybody. George Kittle, we don't know if he's going to play on Sunday. So the 49ers might not even have their quarterback. Jimmy G, there's no guarantee he plays. And Nick Mullins is a very capable quarterback. He's a guy who's a bit of a gunslinger. He likes to go out there and fling it. But Jim Schwartz made a very interesting point when he was asked about going up against a team with as many injuries as the 49ers. This is what Jim Schwartz said about what the team's message is to the players and coaches this week versus the 49ers.
So let's go out and do our jobs. Let's go battle the scheme. And let's respect every player that they put out there, regardless of if they're an all-pro player or a guy that's just brought up from the practice squad. Everybody in this league can play, and everybody's expected to be able to perform if they get put in the game.
Play the scheme. Don't worry about the players. And I thought that was interesting because when you think about when you're playing a team, you tend to go to, like I said earlier, Mahomes versus Lamar. It's always the headliners, right? But it's not always about who you're going up against. And Schwartz said, listen, we got to play the 49ers. We can't worry about who's actually playing in those 49er uniforms.
But whether they have running back that's started the season or a guy that's coming off the practice squad, it really doesn't change what they're trying to accomplish in the game. And, Coach Peterson says all the time, tells us, hey, it's a faceless opponent. Your challenge in a lot of ways is, operating efficiently and doing what you do. And I think that anytime a team has injuries, you have to take that same kind of approach.
And I think Schwartz is right. For the Eagles to win on Sunday, they can't worry about the specific player on the other side. They have to worry less about who's wearing the uniform as much as executing their own game plan. The Eagles had multiple opportunities to win the game on Sunday. Instead, they tied it. Now, part of that's on the quarterback, part of that's on the head coach, part of that's on Matt Pryor, who can't stay still for a couple extra seconds. There's a lot of reasons why they tied the game. I keep wanting to say lost. They tied the game on Sunday, which is even more exasperating. But there's a reason why. There are things that they could have done differently. You have to win this game against the 49ers. You cannot worry about the logistics. You can't worry about who's wearing the uniform. You can't worry about all that other stuff. Schwartz is right. And by the way, the defense overall did their job. The defense overall got the job done. They got the sacks. They got the quarterback pressures. It's just that Joe Burrow played a good game. He's a really good quarterback. I think most people thought that there was a reason why he was the Heisman #1 overall pick, and the way that he has elevated himself and the players around him is impressive. I mean, he's turning T. Higgins into a fantasy football flex play, for goodness sake. I mean, that's what we're talking about. An offense that's got Tyler Boyd and A.J. Green. Well, what happened in the game on Sunday? Darius Slay was on A.J. Green the entire game and locked him out for most of the game. So where did Joe Burrow go? He went to the open receiver. He didn't try to force the ball into anybody. Hello, Carson Wentz. You might want to learn something from the rookie quarterback, but I digress. There is something to be said about the fact that the Eagles' defense did their job. Now, if the offense can do their job, they got a chance to beat the 49ers this Sunday night here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins this Sunday at 7 p.m. Again, coming up about 8 minutes from now, Jeff Pearlman, author of the brand new book, Ring Circus, about the era of the Kobe, Shaq, and Phil Jackson Lakers. We'll get into all that with him coming up, because with the Lakers in the NBA Finals, this is the first time the Los Angeles Lakers have been in the NBA Finals since Kobe Bryant was there with them. It's been over a decade since the Lakers were in the NBA Finals. And historically, the Lakers have always been in the NBA Finals with a superstar, right? It's LeBron, it's Kobe, it's Shaq, it's Magic, it's Kareem, it's Jerry West, it's Wilt. Before that, it was George Mikan, for goodness sake. They've always had a superstar, right? Well, there is no LeBron today if there wasn't that Shaq and Kobe Lakers. So we'll get into all that coming up with Jeff Pearlman approximately 7 minutes from now. And don't forget, a little bit later this hour, one more word for you today. We got another word, Sports Bash Cash. Your chance to win up to $10,000. The final word of the day is coming up at 6:55 tonight. Leading up the Yankees versus Indians. Game 1, Garrett Cole, Shane Bieber, two of the best pitchers in baseball, go head-to-head tonight on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. 609-403-0973, the PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board 609-403-0973. Joey D. in Ventnor chimes in with a bit of a salacious question. He says, would you choose more than half the league's quarterbacks over Carson Wentz? Well, my answer to that question, Joey D., is we need a little context for that. Am I choosing a quarterback for just this Sunday? Am I choosing a quarterback for the rest of the season? Am I just saying who would I rather have? Would I rather have somebody else as the long-term man at the helm for the Eagles than Carson Wentz? I'm still not convinced that Carson Wentz is the lost cause. I'm going to rip him every time he doesn't play well. I'm going to get on him every time he has a bad game, and I'm not happy with the way he's played or the way he's handled business, because there's at times you see his body language is completely ridiculous. But I'm not going to give up on the guy. I'm not going to act like he's incapable of playing football. I think that for me, at least, when I look at the rest of the NFL, here's the problem when you look at the, as you call it, half the quarterbacks in the NFL. Once you get past that top tier, the majority of the quarterbacks in this league to me are kind of all similar. After the Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, they're like in that one tier. And then it's next tier you could say is like, Breeze, Brady, Lamar Jackson. There's these 6-7 quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger, he's having a good year so far. Deshaun Watson, 8. After those 8 guys, to me, everyone after that is kind of negligible, right? Dak Prescott, he's a good, very good, but he's not an all-time great quarterback. He has a lot of still flaws in his game. Matt Ryan's a former league MVP, but there's moments that he doesn't look too great out there. You look around the NFL, Kyler Murray had 3 interceptions last year. The Cardinals lost to a hapless Lions team. I mean, that was a really sloppy game. Speaking of the Lions, Matthew Stafford, if you switch him out with Jared Goff, Matt Stafford might throw for 5,000 yards in the Rams offense. Oh, speaking of Jared Goff, is Jared Goff a really good quarterback, or is he a byproduct of Sean McVay's offense? Josh Allen, you heard Emery Hunt say yesterday on Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN that Josh Allen is a byproduct of a team believing in him and putting him in a position to be successful. Well, let's be honest. If Josh Allen was on the Jaguars or another team, would he be as good? Speaking of the Jags, what is Gardner Minshew anyway? Is he a franchise quarterback? Is he just a starting quarterback? I don't know. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I mean, that guy has about 5 good games a year and then throws about 200 interceptions, it seems like. Again, you look around the league, a lot of these guys have these question marks and issues. I think that we hyper-focus on the Eagles and their quarterback issues because it's who we watch intently every day. But don't overlook the fact that the rest of the league has quarterbacks with their own problems as well. Carson Wentz isn't the worst quarterback in the league. He's certainly not the best. But to me, he's kind of in the same boat with about 10, 12 other guys. And I think if Carson Wentz can at least make better decisions, the Eagles probably have at least 1 or 2 more wins. Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN. PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open at 609-403-0973. Coming up next, Jeff Pearlman, author of the brand new book, Ring Circus. We'll get into all that with him and the Lakers coming up next here on 97.3 ESPN FM and 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea City.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
609-403-0973 for the PlaySugarHouse.com text board, 609-403-0973. Don't forget tonight on 97.3 ESPN, Yankees versus Indians. Coverage begins at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. Game 2 of Yankees versus Indians. Got Game 1, Game 2 of that wild card series here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, NBA Finals tomorrow night, Lakers versus Heat. I'll reserve my prediction for that series tomorrow, but as of right now, I'm definitely leaning Lakers, but we'll see exactly how that goes. By the way, this NFL story is a little bizarre. It's interesting. So, a little detailed background on this. So, the news came out about late this morning. The Titans basically are not going to the facility. They have a virtual week because 3 players, 5 personnel, team staff tested positive for COVID. The current reports are that they're asymptomatic, so that's good news. The Vikings are also not in their building. They're getting retested throughout the week. The idea is that the NFL wants everyone to stay out of the building for 5 to 7 days. And the significance of 5 to 7 days is 2 things. One, the idea is that it takes a certain number of days for the COVID-19 virus to become active in someone's system. And number 2, the idea is that if they keep everyone away from each other and they contact trace, and they have an opportunity to isolate people from each other and still play the game for week 4. Now, in week 4, there's a possibility they could play on Monday night instead of Sunday. I find that a little extra interesting because the Titans are playing the Steelers. And the Steelers came out and said that they still plan to play a game this weekend. All right. I mean, it's great that the Steelers still plan to play this weekend, but Who are they playing? I'm not 100% sure. So, according to Adam Schefter, there were 3 Titans players put onto the COVID list a little bit earlier today. That includes a long snapper. So, this is going to be a very fluid situation the rest of the week. And Roger Goodell in the NFL came out and said, we knew this could happen. We knew this was a possibility. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this is happening around the same time the Notre Dame situation is just going completely out of control, because one of the problems you have with dealing with this pandemic has been the reality that in the NFL and in football in general, you have so many people. You're not just dealing with, 15, 20, 25 people. You're talking about a group of 50, 60, 70 people. So there's way more variables than there ever could be otherwise. So when I look at the football, I have to agree with the way that Roger Goodell in the NFL is characterizing it. It's not surprising because you don't know who's doing what and who's going where. There's way more variables. Nobody's in a bubble. We saw what happened with baseball. You had teams like the Cardinals and the Marlins and the Phillies and these other teams all have to shut down basically parts of their season. Heck, the Mariners wasn't even a COVID-related issue. They had to postpone part of their season and do make goods because of the wildfires. So there are things that are sometimes completely out of your control. And I'm not surprised this is going on at all. I figured that somebody would have a problem along the way. Andy Reid said it before the season. The team that keeps themselves together and stays above water is the team that's going to win a championship this year. And I'm not saying that some guys don't take it seriously, but there is something to be said for the fact that the Dallas Cowboys are housing themselves basically in the hotel and they're limiting their exposure socially. Maybe some of these other guys are not being as cautious as other people. I don't know all the details. I'm not going to sit here and pass judgments, but it is something to keep an eye on. The Notre Dame situation is completely not surprising. One, because they're college kids. And number two, let's be realistic. After what happened with Georgia State, are we surprised by anything? Georgia State, by the way, had their game last weekend postponed. Come to find out, they misread the test results. You want to know why they're doing testing every day? You want to know why they're double-checking tests? Because it's 2020, and we're all still new to this. This has only been an issue for, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months? No offense, but some people are acting like this is, it's so obvious. Get out of here. Nothing's obvious anymore. The fact that politics are involved in any of this makes it all worse. 609-403-0973 on the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. Get on the conversation. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN Game Night. Texter chimes in. He says, Dan from EHT. I have a bad feeling about this Sunday night's game. I think it's going to hit rock bottom, and we may see Hurts at some point. Not just on gadget plays. There's something to be said for the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles are in a bad spot. They are. They're in a horrible spot right now leading up to this weekend. You tie the game, it feels like a season is borderline lost. It's not totally lost, but it's borderline lost. You drafted this quarterback that people are salivating over, right? Maybe there is something to, if things go sideways, you got to put Wentz on the bench. Maybe there is. But as I said before the break, when you look around football, it's easy to point to Carson Wentz and be angry and critique him and not overlook the fact that around the entire NFL, there's a lot of average to good quarterback play in the NFL. It's not like the entire NFL has great quarterbacks and the Eagles are the only quarterback situation that's questionable. I brought this up on Twitter on Sunday, and I just thought of this when you sent that text in, Dan, from EHT. It says, Carson Wentz is the first Eagles quarterback to throw 2 interceptions in 3 straight games since 1985. What's relevant is in 1985, the quarterback was Ron Jaworski. Ron Jaworski has the most wins as a starting quarterback in Eagles franchise history. 1985 is also relevant because that year the Philadelphia Eagles drafted a young, mobile quarterback in the second round. Yes, 1985 was the year Randall Cunningham was drafted by the Eagles. Jalen Hurts, a young, mobile quarterback drafted in the second round. Carson Wentz right now is fourth all-time in Philadelphia Eagles franchise history in quarterback wins at 32. At the time, Ron Jaworski was the leader. That record was broken later on by Donovan McNabb. Could history be repeating itself? I don't know. I can't confirm or deny it. I feel like there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. But I do know one thing, and I can confirm one thing. I understand where you're coming from, Dan, from EHT. How can you have a good feeling after what you've seen for the first 3 weeks? You can't. There is no good feeling to be had. It's Philadelphia Eagles. They find ways to mess up. They really do. And it's a shame. PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0970. Speaking of Eagles quarterbacks, Clayton Thorson has been signed to the Giants practice squad. Wasn't that guy on the Cowboys practice squad last year? I think so. Is he just going to bounce around the entire NFC East and then eventually become like an inspirational speaker about my life in football or something like that? On the PlaySugarHouse.com text board at 609-403-0973. Joey D followed up on his previous text and says, if you go through all 32 teams, would you rather have 16 or more different quarterbacks than Carson Wentz going forward to lead your franchise? If you choose more than those 16, is there good and bad things about your team? Well, that's two different questions. Let's hit on each one, Joey D. And I think you're asking the right questions because there's a lot of questions that had to be asked about this football team. And I make the Carson Wentz analogy, and I know it's not apples for apples, but I'm making the analogy for a reason. When you look at the game of basketball, there's certain superstars you can't win if that guy is your best player, right? You are aware, you understand, it frustrates you, but there are some guys you will never, ever, ever, ever win a championship with in basketball. If Bradley Beal is your best player, you're not winning an NBA championship. Now, if Bradley Beal is maybe your third best player, you have a chance to win a championship, right? Kevin Durant didn't win a championship when it was him and Russell Westbrook, but he won a championship with Steph, Clay, and Draymond. There are situations where certain players are just not capable of doing certain things. And the reason why I bring that up is because when you're asking who's going to lead your franchise forward, the problem with some of the quarterbacks in this league is you might take Tom Brady tomorrow or this Sunday over Carson Wentz, but you might not want Tom Brady 2 years from now. When you look at Drew Brees, you may feel like Drew Brees could do a better job than Carson Wentz right now, but you don't want him 2-3 years from now. You know, the end of the road is coming for some of these veteran quarterbacks, the Bradys, the Breezes. Rodgers is probably about at least 5 years away. Ben Roethlisberger is probably another bad hit to that elbow from being on the outside looking in for the Eagles. When you think about what happens when Carson Wentz isn't here, I said this about Brett Brown. I'll say it again about the Eagles. If you don't want Carson Wentz to be the quarterback, who are you replacing him with? And you say, if you go through all 32 teams, who is out there outside of Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers? I mean, is Cam Newton really this great, or is he being great because the Patriots are the Patriots and they're bringing out the best left in him? Look around the NFL. Who would you rather have, Wentz or Dwayne Haskins? Listen, the only guy in the NFC East you'd rather have than Wentz probably is maybe Dak Prescott. And it's dependent on Prescott's weapons, because we saw when you took away Prescott's left tackle, when you took away Ezekiel Elliott, and when he didn't have Amari Cooper, he was a different quarterback. So you have to wonder how much of the Cowboys' offense is Dak Prescott and how much of it is the players around him putting him in a position to be successful. And you could probably say similar things about Carson Wentz, but I don't know. I have trouble believing that Carson Wentz was able to carry a band of misfit toys to the NFL playoffs last year in December, but this year he's unable to do anything of the sort for the first 3 games. So I have trouble reconciling my mind around this idea that Carson Wentz all of a sudden is the worst quarterback in the NFL, quote unquote, which he's obviously not. I think anybody who's rational can understand that. But as I said, Roethlisberger, Breeze, Brady, they're pretty close to the end. Would you really rather have Deshaun Watson? I mean, listen, I'm a huge Deshaun Watson fan. But how much better is Deshaun Watson making this team? I don't have an answer for that. Deshaun Watson may very well be that much better than Wentz. He may very well be a better all-around quarterback. I don't know if he really is, though. How much of Deshaun Watson's problems is his head coach? How much of his problems is his supporting cast? The fact that he's had some miserable offensive line play at different points in his NFL career? I mean, the Texans had to give up big assets to go out and get Laramie Tunsil because they can't draft an offensive lineman. If you're asking me to go through all 32 teams, so you're saying from West Coast to East Coast, from North to South, how many different quarterbacks would I rather have than Carson Wentz? I mean, I would say there's 8, as I said earlier, but after those 8, I'm not thrilled. I mean, who's really better, Wentz or Matt Ryan? Who's really better, Wentz or Kirk Cousins? Wentz or Phillip Rivers? Wentz or Matthew Stafford? Wentz or Baker Mayfield? Wentz or Sam Darnold? I can keep going. I think that if you're being rational, you realize that Wentz and a majority of the quarterbacks in the league are all kind of on the same level. It's just we watch Wentz so closely that we're picking him apart, and he's had 3 of the worst games of his life in the last 3 weeks. It amplifies the problems. It makes it feel absolutely worse. PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0973. 609-403-0973. Dan from EHT chimes back in and says, we can't deny that they drafted Jalen Hurts not for a backup, or else Sudfeld would be that. Well, before I get to your second point, I think that you're mischaracterizing the Eagles' pick of Hurts. Because, number one, the reason why Sudfeld is the backup is, number one, the Eagles have invested a lot of resources in him. Remember, they picked him off of another team's practice squad, and they purposely promoted him to the Eagles' active roster back in 2017, because they didn't want another team to grab him off of their own practice squad. So they've invested now 3-4 years into this guy. Part of the reason why he's a backup because he has as much, if not more, knowledge than anybody else who would have been available to play backup. I mean, Josh McCown is still recovering from a torn hamstring. Do you really want Chase Daniel back in here? Nick Foles is in Chicago competing for a starting job. Who else would there have been aside from Sudfeld? So You're mischaracterizing the situation a little bit, Dan, from EHT. Now, I'm not denying that the Eagles don't see something special in Jalen Hurts. I saw something special in Jalen Hurts, and I don't work for an NFL team. I just watch a lot of college football. And between Alabama and Oklahoma, the guy showed you leadership. He showed you moxie. He showed you competitiveness. He showed you team leadership. He showed you how he's a team player. He showed you a desire to win. And all of those things make him special. So I'm not denying that he is special or they didn't draft him for no good reason. All right, we'll get back to text board in just a bit. Joining us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, as promised, Jeff Pearlman, author of the brand new book, Ring Circus, joins me right now on Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN. Jeff, how you doing today?
I almost failed you, but I came through at the end.
Well,
that's what counts.
Yeah, that's what counts. And all that counts is you came through at the end. Just like in your book, you talked about in the end that Kobe wouldn't get off the bus and fight Samaki Walker, right?
Wow, nice transition. That is correct. 2002, challenged Kobe to a fight. Then it never happened because Kobe sort of. I mean, I can't say he wimped out, but he didn't want to get off the bus and get in a fight. So self-preservation, perhaps.
Self-preservation, but I think one of the amazing things that you're putting in this book is you are allowing people a deeper insight into some of the biggest faces of the league from the post-Jordan era. And in this book, Ring Circus, you're putting a light on Kobe and Shaq, two people that, a lot of people think they know a lot about, but I'm 5 chapters in, and I'm saying from my experience so far reading this book, I'm learning things about things that I thought were true or I wondered were true, you heard were rumors or maybe true, and you're finding out who genuine these people were before they became the megastars that they became.
I really appreciate that. To me, it all comes down to curiosity, and I always think, like, what would I want to know about these teams and these moments and these players? And I love tracking down guys. Like, I love tracking down guys, not just the Shaqs and the Phil Jacksons, but the Mike Penberthys and the Kareem Rushes and all these guys who were there, had a piece of it. And just what was that magical period like? And, it was when those teams were ruling the NBA and they were in LA and it was Shaq and it was Kobe and it was Phil and it was bright lights and it was fast moving basketball. I mean, it was as good as it got. So it was really fun to write, I got to say.
I know that you had said in previous interviews that Football for a Buck, which is also an incredible book, I highly recommend people read that, especially considering the 2020 election, but that's neither here nor there. You said that was a book, that was something that was really meaningful to you, something that meant a lot to you. So what was the motivation for you to write this book?
I mean, number one is I have to eat. So I have to write books because I write books for a living. Number two is I just found the characters really fascinating. Like, I kept thinking, you always think, whenever I'm thinking of book ideas, I always think, all right, who are the characters that would carry the book? Who are the characters who people would find interesting? And then, usually in sports books like this, you're lucky if you have one or maybe two. Every once in a while you have two. But here, Shaquille O'Neal, iconic NBA figure. Kobe Bryant, iconic NBA figure. Phil Jackson, iconic NBA figure. It's rare that you have 3 people that front and center in the narrative that you want to write. So for me, the thing that was a big draw was the characters more than anything.
And speaking of the characters, I'm learning things about Del Harris I never knew I wanted to know. You described him at one point as a drink of lemonade. I mean, that was incredible. How much was a view for you writing this book also to learn about the people? You mentioned the non-stars. To me, Del Harris is one of the more interesting characters of this whole story because he's really the bridge from, your book Showtime, where you had, Riley and then later Dunleavy and, before that you had Paul Westhead, you had all these guys before him, and now you had Del Harris was the guy before the guy in Phil Jackson.
I love Del Harris. I love everything about Del Harris. I think Del Harris, one thing Del Harris, it was interesting. I was sitting with him. I went to Dallas to interview him, and he was not invited to Kobe's last game when pretty much everyone was invited. And he was definitely hurt by that. It seemed like it stung him. And I think with good reason. People really forget that he sort of was there at the beginning. He basically had to, work with a really young, wild stallion in Kobe Bryant who thought he could run when he wasn't ready yet. And he had to hold him back. And it was not a fun experience, but he did. And I think he was really instrumental in the development of Kobe Bryant. And he had some flaws. He talked way too much. Players got bored by him. He had a very bad relationship with Nick Van Exel, their point guard. But, man, he was a really good coach. And I actually think, I don't know what the Lakers were thinking. I thought it was wrong not to invite him because I think his role in Kobe's career was huge.
Also, his role in the transition of the franchise, because to me, the book is not just about just Kobe and Shaq, but it's also about the state of the Lakers before they won those championships. They were hitting some really low points.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, Magic Johnson leaves and their new point guard is Sedale 3. That is not a good upgrade. So, it was rough and they didn't know what they were going to do because it's one thing when an athlete retires and plan for it. It's another thing when your star and centerpiece says, I have HIV and I'm retiring immediately. And Del Harris, first of all, they drafted well. They got Eddie Jones and Nick Van Exel, which is really good. They had Ceballos, got him in a trade. That was good. Drafted Eldon Campbell, smart. And Del Harris was just a calm, steadying, let's grow, slow and steady wins a race sort of coach. And they got back into it really quick. They weren't great in the early and mid-'90s, but they were really competitive a lot quicker than I think most people thought they would be.
Jeff Pearlman joining us here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN, author of the brand new book, Ring Circus. It's available right now through Amazon, of course. It's great reading material with the Lakers back in the NBA Finals. The last time the Lakers were in the NBA Finals, that guy Kobe Bryant was leading the team. And, I have to think, Jeff, as I'm reading this book, I'm seeing the development and seeing where Kobe Bryant was and knowing now what he became. It's actually an incredible, for lack of a better term, study of human nature of someone who came from a completely different world and evolved into a totally different human being.
I feel that way. I think it's interesting. He was kind of an immature, sheltered high school kid who was a star athlete and kind of things were catered toward him. And he arrives in the NBA with a real chip on his shoulder and a real attitude. And he thinks he needs to show that he's hard and tough and nobody's going to mess with him. And you end up getting this pretty awkward kid who doesn't relate well with others. And it's a real effort to get him to be involved or to care about his teammates. There's one story I've always found really telling. It's when it was 2003 actually, and Karl Malone was on the Lakers. And it was in the locker room. It was November. The players are all about to leave and miss a day for Thanksgiving. And Karl Malone's doing an interview, and he sees Kobe about to leave. And Karl Malone excuses himself in the interview with a reporter for a second. He says, "Hey, young buck, come here." And he calls Kobe over, and he basically says, "Look, you need to wish your teammates a happy Thanksgiving before you leave. You can't just leave." And Kobe's like, "Oh, okay." And he goes back and goes guy to guy, wishing him a happy Thanksgiving. Now that seems like something any normal functioning human being would do, but he just was missing in some social areas, and he needed people like Malone around to tell him, "Look, this is how you behave. This is what you're supposed to do."
With that being said, I got to ask you, because you talk to a lot of different people, how much of that maybe falls on his own parents for maybe not prioritizing the right things with him growing up?
I mean, here's the thing. I feel like if you asked me that question before I had kids, I might say, "Oh yeah, definitely." But it's hard to catch everything, and it's hard being a parent. And sometimes your kid is a certain way, and I mean, certainly possible that they didn't really do a great job with manners. He could be very polite, though. I sometimes think that he was behaving the way he thought you were supposed to play in the NBA. Like there was a guy who went to camp with the Lakers named Paul Shirley, who had a pretty bad experience with Kobe, and he said to me, it was almost like Kobe was writing his own dialogue for his own movie. And I thought that was really it was all thought out beforehand, and the mannerisms and the discussions and the way he was going to say it and the slang he was going to use. It just felt all preordained. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's an interesting question.
Jeff Pearlman joining me here, the author of the brand new book, Ring Circus. Jeff Pearlman, New York Times best-selling author, great books like Football for a Buck, Showtime, Gunslinger, Sweetness. Sweetness is an awesome book as well, I read. Jeff, you think about, the characters in this book. We haven't touched much on the guy who was kind of like the figurehead, which became Phil Jackson. What are your impressions after writing this book about Phil Jackson and the impact he had on that team?
I think it was huge, and I think it started the minute he arrived because he shows up with 6 rings as a coach, 2 more as a player, did the coaching with the greatest player probably in the history of the game, Michael Jordan. So the credibility was huge. He shows up with this cred. And the 2 previous coaches, Dale Harris and Kurt Rambis, didn't have that. They just didn't have that. And a lot of the anger that Shaq had toward what was going on was he felt Kurt Rambis really babied Kobe, and he hated that. So he shows up. He has credibility. He's a really smart coach. He comes along with Tex Winter, the architect of the triangle offense, as his right-hand man. Everything was right. The talent was right. The supporting cast was right. And then they had this coach who people had to listen to because of his track record.
Jeff, one more for you. I appreciate you jumping on the show here late in game night here on 97.3 ESPN. Is here on 97.3, we're leading folks up to Yankees versus Indians at the top of the hour. Before I let you go, is there an aspect of the book? Is there a character? Is there something it's in the book that you can tell folks, if you have to get this book for one reason, 3 Ring Circus, it is what?
Oh, man, because the greatest character who ever lived is in this book, and that was J.R. Ryder, who played for the Lakers for only 1 year, and in no particular order, once missed 3 days of practice because his car broke down, even though he only lived 300 yards from the practice facility, then missed a shoot-around on the road and asked the front desk clerk at the hotel to write him a note to give to Phil Jackson, explaining that they forgot to give him a wake-up call. So he actually showed up with a note, "Dear Coach, it's Jim, the front desk clerk at the Hyatt, and JR should be excused because we did not give him a wake-up call." And then he was pulled over in customs coming back from Toronto by a drug dog because he smoked so much weed, he just smelled like it. He didn't even have any drugs on him, but he smelled so much like marijuana that he actually got detained. So if there's forget Shaq, forget Kobe, forget the 3 championships, forget Phil Jackson. Life should all be about reading about J.R. Ryder.
That's why you need to get 3 Ring Circus right there. Jeff Pearlman, the author of the brand new book. Check it out. Order it right now. Of course, it's available on Amazon and wherever you get your books. There's all guests. He appeared today on Game Night on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Jeff, I appreciate you coming through. I appreciate you jumping on. And thank you so much for writing this book, man. It's awesome.
All right. Thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, speaking of the Lakers tomorrow night, Game 1 of the NBA Finals can be heard right here on 97.3 ESPN. It's LeBron and the Lakers taking on Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. And I'm serious. This book, when you get a Jeff Pearlman book, you're getting a book that is going to have a level of detail and information, and it's going to take you for a ride. And 3 Ring Circus is definitely that kind of book. It's impressive. I can't speak highly enough. I love a book that goes deep and takes you deep into the people involved in the story. And I don't there's not many people who do that as well as Jeff Pearlman. Again, the book is 3 Ring Circus. You can order it right now. Speaking of right now, Sports Bash Cash, final word of the day. Before we get out of here, it is smile. Yes. You smile when you have a good day. The final key word of the day is smile. S-M-I-L-E, smile. Take that word, go over to 97.3 ESPN.com or the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. You have a chance to win up to $10,000 every time you put in a word. That's today's final word, your final opportunity to win up to $10,000. The key word is smile. And Sports Bash Cash has been brought to you by Jersey Shore Federal Credit Union, now in the Peachtree Plaza in Hamilton. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night. Coming up next, Yankees, Indians, Game 1 on 97.3.